and welcome to the first of our election shows. In these shows, we're going to be spending about 5 minutes talking about one of the bigger issues surrounding the election and just trying to put a bit of clarity out there where you might not get some, given some of the debates that have been on television recently. I'll be doing these with Ivan McKee, who you'll have heard on the podcast, and I'm sure more than likely than that you'll have seen on the television as well. Hello, Ivan. How are you?
Hi, Michael. I'm very well.
Great. So the first thing we need to get on to today is the debate we saw today on Sunday Politics Scotland, which I don't think you can really call a debate. Should we just do this in the style of them and just shout over each other for 5 minutes, Ivan? How do you feel about that?
I think we need to do better than that for the listeners, Michael.
Okay. It doesn't work quite so well on radio either.
Absolutely. Yeah, you couldn't call it a debate. It was just a bit of a shouting match. Not good for the voters, but a very strange tactic from the other side. Not dissimilar to what they did against Nicola in a couple of the debates during the referendum, where they just shouted out to run the clock down. But the problem is they did that in the referendum where no were in the lead. Now the SNP are in the lead, and it's a very strange strategy to try to waste time and run the clock down when you're 10 or 15 points behind in the polls.
It does seem slightly odd, but my worry about it would be that it might actually just stop people from voting entirely when they see that, oh God, they're all the same, I can't be bothered with it, you know.
That's certainly a problem, but the other factor, of course, is that the polling data we do have says that the SNP voters are actually more likely to vote than the Labour voters. So if anybody's going to be put off by it, it's more likely to be the soft Labour voters. So again, a very strange tactic.
If you're the person under fire in that sort of thing, I think it must be very, very difficult to deal with. If you've got 3 or 4 of them all shouting at you, it's quite a hard situation to turn round to your advantage, though.
Well, yeah, it's difficult. Nicola's very good at just sticking at it and making her points, and she's very coherent on those points. So that's all you can do, and just work your way through it and understand that's the tactic, and you just need to make the best of it you can. It's a shame she didn't get more opportunity to put across the details of what was important and what people need to hear. And I gather that the main issue that they're coming on at the moment is obviously this full fiscal autonomy situation and what that's all about.
Well, that's the interesting point, because as well as shutting down debate on these kind of shows, it seems that they don't really want to debate that either. Jim Murphy was seen on television in the last couple of days describing full fiscal autonomy as an impenetrable economic mouthful, which in some ways seems to me like either they're insulting the intelligence of the voting public or they just simply don't want to talk about it. So maybe you could give us a clearer idea what it is actually all about.
Yeah, I'll do that. I mean, I think Jim Murphy might not understand it. I mean, he's a guy that spent 9 years at university and didn't get a degree, but I think that you're right, he's insulting the general population and your average voter, because it's quite simple. Full fiscal autonomy is Scotland taking full responsibility for all of its income and all of its expenditure. We stay within the United Kingdom, and there are some shared services, if you like, common defence policy, foreign affairs policy, and macroeconomic policy set at a UK level, but all income and expenditure controlled by the Scottish Government. So it's quite a very simple concept, and why Jim Murphy doesn't get it, I don't really know.
I think the more interesting question is why Jim Murphy doesn't want us to get it.
Absolutely. Because if you look at it, I mean, what they keep talking about is this £7.6 billion, and we need to take a step back and understand where that came from. Because this whole thing is very reminiscent of what the No campaign did during the referendum, which was to throw out numbers and try and scare people into believing that independence was something that we couldn't afford and couldn't cope with. We went a long way to debunking a lot of that during the referendum, but just to look at where we are in this particular debate, the £7.6 billion comes from an IFS report that they brought out after George Osborne's recent budget, and it looked at projected growth figures in Scotland and the rest of the UK based on over the next few years. And that data was based on growth numbers that come from the OBR, and the IFS just lifted that data and projected forward to what the OBR numbers were allegedly saying. And we know that the OBR's record on forecasting anything is pretty shocking. So it's not a great place to start from. And if you look at the numbers themselves, what they've done is they've taken 1 year and said if Scotland had full fiscal autonomy, full responsibility for our income and expenditure, we would have been worse off in that year. Now, you've got to put this in the context, first of all, of only being 1 year. If you actually look back over the last 4 years, for example, in 2 of those years Scotland has been better off than the UK average, significantly so, and another 2 years less so. So this thing does move up and down, and the whole point of having control of your own resources, though, isn't just to deal with what you've got at that particular point in time. It's to take control of the levers and to grow the economy. And all economists would agree that Scotland has got more potential for a higher growth rate than the rest of the UK, given the unused capacity, the productive potential in the Scottish economy that's there to be utilised. So there's no doubt that with the power of full fiscal autonomy, we can make a much better go of growing the economy than we will as part of the UK. And the other thing to remember, of course, is that the UK is no great shakes. They've still got a deficit that's running into 90 billion or so and coming down very, very slowly. So when they talk about Scotland having to borrow some money, 7 billion or whatever the number he was throwing about was, to run our own affairs, you've got to understand that in the context of the wider UK economic position as well. There's another couple of points worth bearing in mind. I mean, the whole Smith Commission, from a financial point of view, is based on this principle of no detriment, which basically means that in the early stages of transitioning over to full fiscal autonomy, Scotland, whatever happens, wouldn't be any worse off, because that's the principle that the Smith Commission is based on. So if they implement Smith, the principle of no detriment would apply, and Alex Sam explains that very well in the epilogue of his book. Is worth a read. Another point, of course, to bear in mind is if that was actually true and we were going to be 7 billion worse off as a consequence of implementing full fiscal autonomy, then the rest of the UK would be 7 billion better off. So if that was really the case, then you'd expect the UK politicians to be biting their hands off to sign us up for full fiscal autonomy, and they could get that 7 billion to spend down south. So that just kind of shows up the nonsense and the fallacy that this line of argument is based on.
Thanks very much, Ivan.
Thank you.